After 7 years, the millionaire returns to the farm. What he discovered will transform everything. Jake Thompson took a deep breath as he stepped out of the sleek black sedan and onto the weathered earth of his family's Iowa farm. Memories swelled in his chest like a rising tide, a mixture of long nights spent under the stars with his father, hands deep in the soil, and the fresh scent of the harvest, now tinged with the bittersweet smell of neglect that encased the land. The farmhouse stood boarded up. The barn's once vibrant colors faded to a dull gray, evoking a familiar ache. He scanned the horizon, his heart racing against a wave of nostalgia punctuated by regret. This was his sanctuary, yet it felt distant, a neglected relic overshadowed by the gilded skyscrapers of New York City that he had long called home. What was it worth? The success that brought him fame and fortune now felt pale against the backdrop of so much lost legacy. Street names sparked memories of neighbors who waved at him. Now the boarded-up homes told tales of despair, each for sale sign a ghost of broken dreams. His father's voice echoed in his mind, firm and reassuring, always emphasizing integrity, work ethic, and community over profit. That mantra had been simple enough, until the fierce light of ambition had dimmed it into background noise. Now, standing amid the overgrown fields, he felt his ambition teeter like a broken fence post, splintered yet holding on. He had been dreaming of transforming this farm into a luxury retreat for wealthy city dwellers, yet guilt clawed at him. Before he could even contemplate his plans, Jake stumbled upon a box of old documents, the weight of time heavy in his hands. As he sifted through each paper, a horrifying realization swept over him. Contracts designed to ensnare local farmers in cycles of debt stared back at him, showcasing betrayal cleverly disguised as opportunity. His heart sank. The very corporate entities he had thrived on were tightening their grip around the farmers he once grew up alongside. It felt like betrayal in the flesh. Could he be a millionaire in a world founded upon exploitation? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications, so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Coming into contact with former friends awakened a turmoil in Jake, their disappointment firing salvos of dread in his gut. What did they see when they looked at him? This man who had once been part of their world now felt like a stranger, a symbol of corporate greed. He confronted an elderly neighbor, a man whose wisdom crackled with life's grit. The neighbor's relentless spirit ignited something in Jake. Together, their discussions transformed the concept of his luxury retreat into a sanctuary, not just a getaway, but a refuge for local farmers. Opposition emerged from all corners as the specter of change loomed large. Old friendships were put to the test. Accusations of betrayal hung in the air like a thick fog. As the community's stitches frayed, Jake's heart raced with impending hopelessness. Would he become the man who abandoned his roots for fame? Or could he embody the leader his father had nurtured? Nothing felt certain as he stood there, caught between his father's legacy and the fierce pursuit of a dream that seemed increasingly out of reach. The very soil beneath him seemed to tremble under the pressure of public opinion. This was more than mere ambition. This was about honor. As unease washed over him, the question became a piercing echo in his mind. Could he balance the hollow allure of wealth with a fulfilling legacy? With uncertainty looming like storm clouds, Jake stepped deeper into the growing darkness of his dilemma, bracing for the reckoning that lay ahead. The morning sun filtered through the haze of the late summer air, casting a golden hue over the shattered remnants of Jake Thompson's childhood. Each glance towards the scattered fields tugged at his heart, yet a simmering resolve began to thwart the tendrils of despair. An ominous future threatened the nostalgic shelter he had envisioned, yet he felt the flicker of possibility daring to emerge from within him. Jake wrestled with his mounting urgency as he paced the length of the main barn, the wood creaking beneath his weight, mirroring the tension in his mind. He had a choice. To forge ahead with a retreat that would attract affluent visitors, or to ignite the soil beneath him. A far deeper richness lay in the community he had almost abandoned. An idea crystallized. What if he transformed the farm into an educational space, allowing local farmers to revive their techniques, sharing knowledge and resources to combat the corporate chains threatening their livelihoods? But as the concept festered in his mind, so did the doubts. Would he find allies among those he once knew? His heart throbbed with trepidation as he recalled their faces, etched with disappointment. He stepped outside, the sun now fully risen, and took in the remnants of his father's legacy. The rusted machinery and fractured tools whispered a past filled with promise, an existence that had bound its strength in community rather than capital. In the days that followed, Jake resolved to reconnect. He sought conversations, stepping cautiously into coffee shops and bars, vibrant reminders of a time when he was welcomed with open arms. With every encounter, the familiar faces conveyed skepticism, yet there was a flicker of remembrance in their eyes. They recognized the boy who left, yet struggled to define the man who returned. "What do you want, Jake?" a former classmate asked, his voice sharp. "To help," Jake responded, his heart pounding. "To make things right." "Help? You mean the help that left us for the big city? We don't need charity or pity," came the cold retort. "I can't change the past," Jake replied, swallowing hard. "But I can change the future." He leaned forward, urgency sharpening his voice. "I want to create something that will benefit everyone. Educational programs, resources, access to sustainable practices." The room simmered in silence as his words hung thick in the air. Some listened with cautious hope while others dismissed him outright. But Jake remained undeterred. He shifted his focus to building a proposal, addressing objections with sound strategies, aiming to win their trust back challenge by challenge. What he hadn't anticipated were the whispers that spread like wildfire in his hometown. Speculation, resentment, doubt. His vision was a battle with history etched deep in the hearts of every resident. The town hall meeting had been a haze of anger and frustration, but Jake stood at the front resolute. It was his first direct confrontation with the naysayers. He felt raw emotion churn within him, gripping the edges of his strength. As the concerned whispers grew louder, he summoned the memories of his father's teachings, the courage to face uncertainty and inspire others. "I am not here to erase the past. I am here to rebuild, not just this farm but the bonds we share." His words flowed, each syllable laced with sincerity. "We can fight against those who exploit us, but only if we work together." A lone voice rose from the crowd, sharp and accusatory. "And who are you to say that? You ran away." Fires of resistance burned brightly around him, yet a shift began to form. The raw edges of his motivation splintered against the wood of local hope, creating a path he hadn't noticed before. As the din faded, Jake knew the moment called for a deeper commitment, a daunting clarity. With every word echoed around the room, he realized he was not just asking for acceptance. He was offering himself up for vulnerability, laying bare his own turmoil in front of those he had turned his back on. Would they accept him, despite, or because of, everything that had come before? The stakes had never felt higher, and yet the charge of resolve coursed through him. The meeting wasn't over. The journey had only just begun. As he walked outside, the ember of transformation igniting deep within, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the greatest challenge was still to come. The faces of his past lingered hauntingly in his mind, the moment of truth lurking ahead. Who would stand with him when the dust settled, and who would choose to remain in the shadows? Jake spent the following days combing through old notes and dusty shelves in the barn, searching for the remnants of any knowledge his father had imparted before his death. Amidst the cobwebs and rust, he discovered journals filled with agricultural insights that brimmed with passion, practical strategies, and heartfelt aspirations for the community. Each page, worn from years of handling, reignited his own dormant ambitions. The evening light streamed through the cracked windows of the barn as he read, the air thick with the earthy scent of hay and nostalgia. He couldn't help but feel a tightening knot in his stomach, a mix of yearning and urgency. He was honoring his father's legacy, but that legacy was tied inseparably to the community he had left behind. It occurred to him that what his father had wanted was not just to grow crops, but to cultivate relationships with the people around them. Yet the deeper Jake delved, the more the doubts crawled back. A creeping fear shadowed his resolve. What if he wasn't capable of this transformation? Every interaction he had experienced since his return echoed with disbelief. The community's skepticism cast a long shadow. He figured it would only take one wrong move for trust to slip through his fingers entirely. He decided to reach out directly to the farmers, targeting those who had suffered most under the corporate yoke. With trepidation, he sent messages to a small handful of them, hoping for a few responses. Weeks passed with silence, as his efforts dwindled against the weight of disappointment. Each unanswered message served as a reminder of the chasm that lay between him and the community he wished to serve. It wasn't until one rainy afternoon, while tackling a burgeoning stack of updated proposals, that he received a reply. It was from Clara Rodriguez, a fiercely independent farmer who had taken the brunt of the market's shift. Her response was blunt but uncomplicated. "Let's meet." The meeting unfolded with palpable tension. Clara's penetrating gaze examined his every reaction as they sat across from each other at the community cafe. Jake swallowed hard as he opened the conversation. "I believe we can create something here. An educational program rooted in sustainable practices that can benefit all of us," he started, keeping his voice steady despite his racing heart. "A way to share techniques, to help ourselves adapt and thrive." She narrowed her eyes, her skepticism woven from years of guarding her own struggles. "And how are you going to convince others after abandoning us? What makes you different now? What's in this for you?" Jake hesitated, realization dawning as he faced her challenge. This wasn't just about selling a concept. It was about confronting his past and laying bare his intent. "I'm not here to profit," he replied, his voice gaining strength as he connected with the emotions buried under his surface. "I'm here because I have seen how the disconnect hurt all of us. I want to learn too. I want to collaborate. I want nothing more than to help us all adapt together." The seconds stretched into minutes as Clara picked apart his sincerity. Just as Jake felt the anchor of despair weighing him down, a flicker of something changed in her expression. Curiosity, perhaps. "You know what you're asking us to do?" she replied, her tone softening just a fraction. "You're asking us to trust." Jake nodded, understanding the depth of her words. Trust was not a simple transaction. It was an ongoing commitment, anchored in shared vulnerability. This realization struck him with an unexpected intensity. He knew that recreating the bond between himself and the community would require something much deeper than a mere proposal. It demanded authenticity and transparency. If he wanted to instigate a change, he would need to lead with unwavering openness, even as his resolve began to fray. As they finished their coffee, Clara's stare held him captive, a mixture of wariness and respect in her expression. She didn't promise him anything, but the air felt charged with a tentative hope. After their meeting, Jake left with both dread and anticipation swirling within him. He was starting to understand that this journey would not be about a simple educational program. It would be a revolution of identity, both personal and collective, requiring engagement at every level. As dusk fell that evening and shadows crept through the fields, Jake felt the weight across his shoulders like a sash of destiny. He had taken a first step, but what lay ahead would demand an even greater leap into the unknown. His father's legacy was not just about agriculture. It was about leadership, honesty, and growth. The next day, he prepared himself for the inevitable. He would be reaching out again. But this time it would require a different conversation altogether, one that involved confronting the fears deeply embedded in both his community and himself. How would they really respond? What skeletons shared by others would come back to haunt him? As he penned his next message, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. A fight, not just for recognition, but for redemption. The morning sun broke over the fields, its rays spilling over the horizon and illuminating the land Jake had once felt so disconnected from. Yet now, it felt different. With his heart pounding against his chest, he glanced at the stack of messages on his desk. They felt both crucial and overwhelming. Each was a lifeline thrown into a sea of doubt. But what if they were also invitations for judgment? He tapped his pen against the table, questioning the words he'd chosen. They felt inadequate, mere syllables strung together. He needed to connect on a deeper level. Would sharing his vulnerabilities help in dispersing their skepticism? Or would it only serve as a reminder of his perceived failures? Pushing his doubts aside, he drafted a message aimed at the other farmers he hoped to include. He poured his essence onto the blank page, acknowledging his past mistakes and emphasizing his intent to learn, to reform, and to collaborate. Each word felt as if it demanded authenticity. It made the hairs on his arms stand. After clicking send, a rush of anxiety surged through him. What if their responses mirrored Clara's initial skepticism? He couldn't let his mind linger there. He had to push onward. This was his turning point, a step toward reclaiming his purpose. In the days that followed, Jake dove headfirst into a regimen of research and community outreach. He sought inspiration from his father's journals, blending old techniques with modern sustainable practices. He began to sketch out a rough blueprint for a workshop series, one that would serve as a platform for sharing both skills and stories. He envisioned a space where lessons could be exchanged as freely as the air flowed amongst them. But with each passing evening spent in the barn, shadows flickered in the back of his mind. His earlier attempts at engagement had been met with silence. Would this new initiative falter before it even began? In this reflection, a revelation flickered to life. He needed to confront his own fears head-on. As he mapped out the structure of workshops, he envisioned facing the farmers in informal circles, sharing not just technical knowledge but personal experiences. He could admit his failures, the shame he had carried for years. It could be cathartic, not just for him but for the others who bore their own burdens. However, he quickly understood that a simple admission wasn't enough. They wouldn't simply accept his word. He needed tangible proof of his commitment, a gesture that would embody the spirit of sincerity and dedication. Thus, he made a decision, a bold one. What if instead of a traditional workshop he organized a series of collaborative days on the farm, an opportunity for hands-on work where they could share practices, learn, and engage in the very soil that connected them? His heart raced at the thought. Would the farmers feel invited to join him? Or would they reject the effort, seeing it as another act of futile resolution? As fear buried its cold fingers deeper into his psyche, he remembered Clara and her challenge about trust. He couldn't expect someone else to risk vulnerability without being willing to do the same. Every time Jake stepped outside to breathe the fresh morning air, he felt the fighting spirit within him growing. He realized that the journey to trust wasn't linear. It was a winding path filled with steep inclines and possible pitfalls. While he worked tirelessly on the logistics, he also confronted his own insecurities in quiet moments alone. The day he sent the invitation for the collaborative farm days was one filled with trepidation. With each click of the mouse, he debated whether he should hold back, whether he should hold himself back just a little longer. Deep down, he felt he was playing a game against himself, daring yet uncertain. But life, filled with uncertainties and risks, had to be lived boldly. The responses came in waves, some supportive, others hesitant, and a few outright dismissive. Yet Clara replied almost immediately, echoing the sentiment of others who felt inspired by his renewed passion. "Count me in," her note read, a simple line that ignited a spark of determination in Jake's spirit. Could this be the breakthrough he had been longing for? Yet, just as hope began to rise, he realized the challenge ahead was monumental. The real work would take place between sharing practical strategies and birthing genuine connections amidst scars of mistrust. What were the stories that others would unveil? What hidden challenges would arise to test his leadership at those very moments when vulnerability was needed most? It was shaping into more than an event. It was becoming a crucible for his resilience. With the first day of collaboration approaching, Jake knew he stood at a precipice, both anxious and exhilarated. The success of the endeavor, intertwined with his father's legacy, felt like an inevitable birthright he was coming to reclaim. The morning air filled his lungs as he readied himself, but the unsettling question nagged at the edges of his optimism. Would he be strong enough to weather the storm? Would the past collapse on him just when he finally stepped into the light? The moment of reckoning loomed closer with each heartbeat. Jake awoke before dawn on the day of his first collaborative farm day, knowing the weight of what lay ahead. The chill in the air seemed to seep deeper into his bones, amplifying his uncertainty. He pressed his hands together, the warmth and odd comfort against the swirling moss of anxiety drowning his thoughts. They were coming today, those farmers he once felt so alienated from, and he harbored visceral doubts about whether he'd made the right choice in inviting them. He took a moment to gather his thoughts, moving through the day's agenda in his mind. The format was structured yet fluid, an invitation for dialogue woven with hands-on tasks. He would be vulnerable, but was that enough? Would the farmers engage, or would they simply seek the opportunity to critique what he had built, or rather, what he hoped to build? As he prepared for the day, he set up chairs in a semicircle under the great oak tree, its sprawling branches casting a patchwork of shadows on the ground. It seemed to shelter him as if reminding him of his own roots. This tree had witnessed generations of labor, joy, and pain, the very essence he craved to channel back into the land. At 8 o'clock sharp, the first couple of farmers arrived. Jake stepped outside, a tentative smile crossing his face as he greeted them. Clara was there, her presence a grounding force, but even her familiar face couldn't mute the chatter of self-doubt that echoed in his head. As they nodded and exchanged pleasantries, he felt glimmers of hope ignite. In the early hours, they shared simple tasks, planting seedlings, fixing fences, and mending what had been broken, not just in the land but in their connections. He listened intently, asking questions, and they began to share stories, his fears slowly giving way to a sense of discovery. Each tale unveiled layers of struggle, resilience, and commitment, echoing his own journey. With each hour that passed, Jake observed subtle shifts. The dismissive glances softened, laughter began to surface, and he could feel barriers gently lowering. Yet as the sun climbed higher, the looming specter of confrontation emerged. The turning point arrived unexpectedly during a break when one farmer, Rufus, took a step forward, a hard expression set on his weathered face. "Jake," Rufus began, his voice low but steady, "you talk about rebuilding trust, but how do we know this isn't just another one of your grand ideas that will fizzle out? We've heard promises before." The words landed squarely in Jake's chest. His immediate response, the instinctive urge to defend himself, to dismiss the discomfort, sharpened his focus. Instead, he inhaled deeply, grappling with the rawness of the moment. "You're right," he replied, "and I can't ask any of you to believe something I'm not fully invested in myself. I'm giving you my word. But if that's not enough..." He trailed off, wrestling with vulnerability. The challenge demanded more than mere conviction. It required an acknowledgement of the pain tied to his word. "I'm here because I want to reclaim this legacy, and also my relationships with all of you. But I have to earn your trust just as much as you earn mine." Rufus remained silent, the tension palpable, as Clara stepped in. "You asked for honesty, and that's where we all need to start. Let's see how this unfolds." With a tentative nod, a shift began to ripple through the group. Reflections turned into deeper discussions, and hesitations morphed into collaborative efforts. Yet as the day progressed, Jake couldn't shake the idea that one moment could upend the fragile thread of trust they were weaving. The shadows lengthened, and Jake felt a surge of determination, yet a dark whisper loomed. Was this fragile foundation sustainable? Amidst the hard work and budding connection, a flicker of recognition surged within Jake. He discovered an unexpected strength and vulnerability. But could that integral moment of trust truly be transformed into lasting change? He looked across the field, the sun dipping low, feeling the weight of his father's legacy pressing against him with undeterred persistence. Even as laughter echoed around him, doubt still lingered like an unwelcome shadow. Was he truly ready to face the inevitable storm that awaited? The day had brought connection, but also a realization that the greatest challenges were still unfolding. Would he be able to navigate the depths of vulnerability before everything he sought shattered into a million pieces? As he processed this heavy question, another farmer approached him, and the moment hung with the potential to either elevate or undo everything he had begun to build. Jake's heart raced as the farmer approached him, each step a reminder of the precarious balance he constantly walked between hope and uncertainty. The sun, now a molten orb, cast long shadows, painting the ground with a tapestry of light and dark. He breathed, hoping to channel the warmth of the day into the chill that gnawed at him. Would this moment be the breakthrough, or another step toward collapse? The farmer, a bulky man named Hank, paused a short distance away, his brows furrowed as if sorting through a tangled skein of thoughts. Jake sensed the weight of expectation hanging in the air. "You said you want to change things around here," Hank finally said, his tone gruff but curious. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Jake hesitated, the question resonating in the quiet. He knew he had to provide clarity not only to Hank but to himself. "I want to create something lasting. Environments where we can share resources, knowledge, and trust. A community that doesn't just survive but thrives together," he articulated, the words slowly forming, reflecting a vision he had often dreamt but struggled to frame. "And I know I must earn that with action, not just promises." Hank nodded, though skepticism remained etched on his face. It was a look he understood all too well, one he had worn himself countless times before, questioning motives and wondering if the idealism shared by many could truly manifest in reality. "You think it's just about trust then? What if you do all this and it doesn't work out in the end?" Jake swallowed hard. He hadn't prepared for this line of questioning, which seemed to peel back the layers he'd tried to harden against scrutiny. "That's a risk I'm willing to take," he replied, his voice more fervent than he intended. "I won't let fear dictate my choices any longer. If I fail, I fail. But I'd rather confront those failures head-on than look back in regret." A flicker of something elusive crossed Hank's eyes. Was it admiration? Jake took it as a glimmer of hope, a tiny breeze stirring the still air of doubt that had lain stagnant for too long. As discussion sparked between Hank and the others, Jake felt energy gathering around him. He was no longer just a passive participant tethered to his legacy. He was commandingly present. He watched as conversations flowed, ideas emerged, and alliances began to form under the great oak tree, a testament to growth and resilience. With every laugh, every challenge, the shadows receded, and he could feel the burgeoning threads of connection weaving tighter. Yet, as night crept in and the fire was kindled, anxiety crept back in, a constant companion. Would he still be capable of navigating the deeper complexities of relationships, the hidden fields of distrust running beneath the surface? The earlier discussions danced vividly in his mind like flickering flames, illuminating the fears that lingered, threatening to consume his newfound confidence. The feeling was visceral and consuming. Jake's thoughts wandered back to Rufus's challenge, to prove his commitment was real. The pressure of truth weighed heavily, reminding him that the seeds of trust could just as easily be uprooted by one errant word. As they shared stories, laughter blending into the night, Jake made a silent vow. He would confront his past, dig deeper into his motivations, and fight through. But the last vestiges of uncertainty remained, whispering reminders of the delicate balance he must maintain with every decision. In that moment, he spied Clara watching him from across the fire. The light flickering in her eyes held a mixture of encouragement and questions, urging him forward, yet tethering him to his deeper struggles. Here lay his next challenge, embracing vulnerability while maintaining the direction he needed to propel himself and the group into a future that was still shrouded in uncertainty. As Jake rose, determined to express his aspirations, he felt a burgeoning realization. Perhaps it wasn't just about gaining their trust. It was also about accepting the trust he needed to rebuild within himself. What lies beneath those layers he'd kept hidden for so long? Would the truth set him free, or would it bring retribution from a past he fought to escape? With the crackling sound of the fire echoing, he realized the moment had come, to unlock the doors to his own heart before they could build a bridge among each other. And in that intent, there lay an inkling of fear intertwined with exhilaration. Would he find the strength to confront the dark corners of his own history, or abandon what could potentially transform everything. Jake stood before the flickering flames, the warmth slowly seeping into his bones. But it did little to thaw the chill of self-doubt that clung like ivy to his core. The faces around the fire brought him both comfort and unease, each smile starkly contrasting with the turmoil bubbling beneath his skin. It was as if they were witnesses to a performance, and he was just learning the lines of a script he had long buried in his past. He took a steadying breath and stepped forward, the crackling fire illuminating the path ahead, both physically and metaphorically. "I want to share a part of my journey, one that's shaped who I am today," he began, his voice surprisingly steady. "It's more than just a personal story. It's about how we can learn from our past to forge a stronger present together." The crackle of the fire momentarily muted the world around him, allowing Jake to delve into memories once too painful to articulate. His voice became stronger as he recounted his experiences, the failures that had haunted him, the success that had felt hollow, and the emotional barricades he'd built like a fortress around his heart. Each word he spoke felt like chiseling away at a boulder that had weighed him down for years. As Jake continued to share, he noticed the subtle shifts in the faces of those around him. Clara leaned in, her gaze unwavering, capturing his attentiveness and care. The farmers, skeptical at first, began to nod ever so slightly, as the threads of his narrative interwove with their struggles, offering a glimpse of shared experiences. Yet the moment was also a tempest. Jake felt the bitterness arise when his thoughts shifted to Rufus, always lurking, reminding him of how deeply mistrust could fester. Rufus believed motivation stemmed from survival instincts bred through distrust. Jake had never seen it that way. Motivated by hope, Jake wanted to prove that bonds could be formed without defensiveness. As his story wound to a close, Jake could feel the collective breath held by his audience, the weight of his confession settling in the air. "I'm not asking for blind faith," he continued, his heart pounding. "I want to build a foundation where we can all trust each other through transparency and shared experience. But I also need to be truthful about my own vulnerabilities." Silence met his words, heavy with contemplation. He felt a shift within himself as if a bridge was slowly being forged, though still bound by the hesitance lurking in the shadows of their pasts. Jake's aspiration to inspire trust opened the door to self-reflection. What could he offer that was raw, authentic, and real? Just then, Hank stepped forward, breaking the stillness. "What you're saying makes sense," he rumbled, his expression softer now. "But trust isn't built on words alone. It's tested daily. You're talking about collaboration. We're all weary of loss and disappointment." Jake nodded, understanding the importance of Hank's message, his challenge masquerading as an affirmation. The path forward was no longer one-dimensional. He needed to think strategically, to analyze what true collaboration entailed beyond the idealism he had grasped for with both hands. His mind raced with thoughts that ignited a spark within him. What if he initiated shared projects based on trust exercises? What if they confronted the community with transparency, choosing members to communicate openly about both their successes and struggles? Jake felt a thrill course through him. These were strategies he could implement, tangible actions to bolster the foundations he sought to build. But clarity didn't obfuscate his doubts entirely. Jake felt the familiar dread of failure crawling back, accompanied by the specter of the past that loomed larger now within his mind. Would his dark history sabotage his newfound pathway, or could he confront it head-on? In that moment he made an internal vow. He would devise a plan to cultivate not just communal trust but his own, a renewed sense of purpose. What if he were to channel his history not as a weight but as a potent force for change? As the embers danced and the flames rose higher, Jake felt a newfound resolve solidifying within him. The fire reflected the possibilities, and the choice lay heavy now in his hands. Would he risk revealing the deepest truths of his past in hopes of building something truly transformative? Or would he retreat into the safety of his familiar shell? With Clara's steady gaze upon him, he recognized his next step. The time had come to face the shadows of his own making and bask in the possibility of redemption, both for himself and for those who had dared to listen. Would he find the courage to embrace vulnerability as a pathway to strength? Or would he falter at the precipice of revelation? The cool night air filled Jake's lungs as he stepped away from the flickering flames. Each breath heaved with the weight of his thoughts. Clara's gaze still lingered on him, a quiet encouragement, but it was Hank's challenge that reverberated in his mind. Trust was a daily endeavor. True trust was not merely founded in words. It blossomed through action, consequence, and shared vulnerability. Jake turned his back to the fire and began to pace. Ideas whirled around like leaves in a gust of wind. Trust exercises, accountability groups, and open conversations. They were intriguing proposals, yet he knew their execution would demand more from him than mere enthusiasm. There was a dissonance between the vision he held and the reality of his limitations. He needed to reflect, not just on the words he spoke, but on the actions he was prepared to take. What if the fear of failure, his perennial companion, was more potent than the pull of potential success? That thought stuck like a thorn in his mind. What had he actually achieved in the past? Each step he had taken toward personal evolution was littered with missteps, misunderstandings, and misguided intentions. The churning inside him begged for acknowledgement. How could he lead when he himself was still grappling with the specter of insecurity? He paused, staring into the shadows that danced along the edges of the fire's glow. Confrontation. Was he prepared to confront both the ghosts of his past and the skeptical eyes of those around him? He was no stranger to conflict, having faced plenty in the 7 years since he left home. But the conflict he faced now was rooted not in external threats but in his perception of self. Was he capable of forging a new identity, one that was interwoven with elements of cooperation and vulnerability? What would Rufus do? The question arose unbidden, and Jake realized he needed to assess that relationship too. Rufus represented a dogged determination to survive, much like a weed pushing through concrete. But could that perspective align with Jake's hopes for solidarity and transformation? Would his history with Rufus fuel further distrust among them? Or could it be the catalyst for forgiveness and growth? Shaking off his contemplative haze, Jake felt the urge to write down his thoughts. He found a notebook tucked away in his pocket, a remnant of old habits, and began to jot down ideas. Trust-building exercises, group outings to deepen connections, candid discussions about failures and shared aspirations. But how could he illustrate these concepts so that others could see their value? He stopped scribbling abruptly, a sudden realization crashing into him. These were not just strategies, they were invitations to vulnerability. How could he ask others to show themselves if he wasn't prepared to do the same? At that moment, with pen hovering above the page, Jake confronted the inevitable. Sharing his vulnerabilities would require a leap of faith. He imagined giving voice to his struggles, the traumas he had avoided, the mistakes that nearly ruined him. What if sharing these truths created the connection he so desperately sought? Or would it lay bare an already fractured self and invite ridicule? Determination surged through him as he made a decision. Not only would he express his regrets, but he would also outline the recovered lessons from those experiences. He'd present his truths as tools for growth, not just confessions of failure. It wouldn't be easy, but authenticity was now his guiding star. With renewed conviction, he returned to the fire, notebooks tucked securely under his arm. As he gathered inspiration from the warmth and the presences surrounding him, he braced himself to confront not only the gathered audience, but the parts of himself that had long sought reconciliation. He could almost hear his pulse quickening as he approached the group. Trust, he knew, would be tested. But for now, the only thing he could do was take the next step toward that unpredictable horizon. Was this what they called the fragrance of hope mixed with trepidation? The question lingered, and a new thought arose. Perhaps this was not just about building trust within the group. Perhaps it was the beginning of building trust within himself. But was he ready to face the truth that might disrupt every illusion of safety he had carefully orchestrated? Jake drew a breath, preparing to unveil the first layer of his carefully constructed facade. The challenge of revelation loomed, ripe with possibility. Jake stood at the edge of the circle, the flickering flames painting fleeting shadows across the faces of his peers. There was a simmering energy in the air, a blend of anticipation and skepticism. As he cleared his throat, he could feel the weight of their gaze piercing through him, demanding raw honesty. It felt like standing on the precipice of an unscalable cliff with only his own resolve to secure his footing. "Listen," he began, his voice just above a whisper but strict with intent. "I haven't always been the person I want to be. I've made choices that hurt others and myself." The words tumbled out, easier than he'd expected but still heavy with consequence. Clara's nod was minimal yet affirming, while Hank's expression was inscrutable, a mask of guarded interest. Jake continued, pushing through the rising tide of self-doubt. He spoke of the failures he hadn't been able to shake, the insecurities that fucked with his sense of worth. As he laid bare those sacred pieces of himself, he could feel something shift, not in the audience alone, but within his inner sanctuary. "And I've often masked that fear behind a facade of perfection," Jake admitted, his palms sweating against the notebook he clutched. He shared stories both cringe-inducing and enlightening, revealing his relentless strive for achievement that always ended in hollow victories. With each confession, pressure released. He was dismantling the boundaries he had constructed for so long. Surprisingly, it wasn't the shame of past actions that dominated him now, but rather a burgeoning sense of pride. He began to see those missteps as stepping stones rather than stones of condemnation. Unpacking these moments of vulnerability felt akin to peeling back layers of a hard shell, revealing tender, raw flesh beneath. "I want to invite you all to hold me accountable. Not just to me, to all of us," he proposed, locking eyes with his audience, igniting a new kind of energy. "Let's turn our failures into foundations for what we can achieve together. We won't hide from our pasts. We will shine a light on them." A murmur broke through the crowd, uncertainty and contemplation wrapped in the brisk night air. He could almost see minds churn as people turned his challenge over like stones in a stream. What would that truly mean for them? Hank finally chimed in, his voice rich with skepticism. "And what's in it for us, Jake? You're asking us to trust you even when you're admitting you might not have the answers." Jake inhaled deeply, feeling the gravity of Hank's words. There was no easy answer. His pursuit of trust was uncharted territory. "I'm asking for the same courage I'm attempting to summon. Every one of us has flaws, but if we're candid, we can forge a deeper kind of trust, one that inspires growth, not fear," he replied, resolving to stand firmly in his conviction. As silence enveloped them, Jake held his breath. He could feel the atmosphere shifting, the potential for solidarity beginning to crystallize. Not only did he want to foster trust among them, but he realized he was also laying down the roots of trust within himself. Watching the reflections in their faces, Jake felt something transformative unfurl within him, like the first breath of spring after a long winter. But this wasn't merely about acceptance, it was about the act of creating a space where vulnerability was a strength, not a weakness. As he opened the dialogue, Clara took the opportunity to speak, her voice inflected with a warmth he found disarming. "What if we made this weekly, Jake? An accountability circle? We can support each other, share our experiences, and hold each other accountable." It was an intriguing proposal, the sort he hadn't dared to dream might emerge from this gathering. But as hopeful thoughts took root, a sudden wave of anxiety washed over him. What if they intended to expose the very vulnerabilities he had just laid bare? Grappling with that possibility, he sensed the familiar pulse of fear returning. Nevertheless, as uncertainty burgeoned, he understood. This was merely another chapter of his story. Would he let fear dictate his path, or would he embrace the unyielding thrill of stepping into the unknown? Was he ready to continue this journey filled with both risk and revelation? As Jake basked in the electricity of their shared moment, he felt feet planted firmly in the soil of purpose. Yet lurking beneath that resolve was an unsettling thought. The moral dilemmas ahead would test every ounce of the trust he fought to cultivate. And the true nature of his growth had yet to be unveiled. The morning sun shone brightly upon the fields, casting a golden hue over the revitalized farm that had become more than just a patch of land. Jake Thompson stood on the porch of the restored farmhouse, feeling solid confidence surge within him. The collaborative efforts from the past months, marked with shared laughs, frustrations, and tears, had indeed transformed the farm into a living embodiment of community, a place of learning, healing, and sustainable growth. With the first workshops behind him, he looked at the farmers gathered in the field, an eclectic mix of grit and determination reflecting through their eyes. Clara, Hank, and Rufus were among them, their presence a testament not only to the challenges they had faced but to the bonds they were cultivating. They were no longer just farmers. They were a team, united by a shared purpose that extended beyond mere survival. In the weeks that followed the first accountability circle, Jake had witnessed a shift that exceeded all expectations. Farmers began to bring their children, eager to instill in them the values of collaboration and community care. Each planting season brought new techniques learned and shared, with Jake ensuring every worker's voice was valued and heard. He reserved a space for their histories, intertwining them with educational courses that championed sustainable practices. The air buzzed with ingenuity and growth. "Jake, the yield this year is the best we've seen in ages," Clara exclaimed one afternoon as they surveyed the flourishing crops. Her face radiated with pride, her fingers clasping the data sheets that showcased the transformation. It wasn't merely about the numbers. It spoke volumes of the commitment and teamwork that had revitalized everyone's spirits. Jake marveled at how they had leveraged their individual strengths, blending them into a greater purpose. The isolation that had pervaded the community dissolved like mist under the warming sun. This was his father's legacy manifesting in ways he had never anticipated. Integrity, collaboration, and resilience reigniting the heart of the farming collective. Boasting stories of renewal, Jake was no longer the man who fled in pursuit of monetary gain. He had come back to confront his past mistakes, and in doing so, rediscovered who he truly was, a leader worthy of the trust and respect of the community he had longed to serve. One afternoon, while leading a workshop on soil revitalization techniques, Rufus surprised Jake with a request for feedback. "Your approach has helped us confront things we've avoided for too long," he challenged, his tone softer yet still cautious. "I think we're ready to try something bigger. A community farmers market, what do you think?" Jake's heart raced. He thought of the bustling farmers markets he once passed on his way to corporate meetings. This was a chance for their products and stories to be shared with a broader audience. "Absolutely, let's do it," he responded, enthusiasm bubbling in his chest. "Let's show everyone what we can accomplish together." As plans unfolded, Jake spearheaded this initiative, drawing from the wealth of ideas shared in the accountability circles while tapping into his growing confidence. He witnessed his vision for the market materialize before his eyes. What had once seemed like a daunting task now felt invigorating. When the day of the market finally arrived, every farmer stood proudly beside their freshly grown produce and artisanal goods. Jake felt the swell of camaraderie enveloping him, evidencing clear professional growth. As visitors arrived, drawn by the scent of fresh bread and ripe tomatoes, the air hummed with excitement and conversation. Jake stepped back and scraped the tip of his boot into the earth, feeling firmly rooted in the moment. This was exactly the kind of legacy he yearned to build, one that encompassed authentic connection and the shared triumphs of many. As the sun began to set, dousing the fields in shades of orange and deep blue, Jake found a sense of deep fulfillment wash over him. For the first time in years, he stood not as an ambitious millionaire lost in the bustle of city life, but as a man proud of his heritage, embracing the very soil from which he had come. He had achieved an unshakable identity built on trust, compassion, and partnership. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a reminder of the many miles he had traversed since he first stepped onto this land. But now, instead of ghosts of doubt, he felt grounded in the knowledge that he had transformed not only the farm, but himself. With each passing day, he proved that overcoming one's insecurities and embracing vulnerability can pave the way for extraordinary achievements. Ending this chapter, Jake knew he had conquered his greatest enemy, himself. Stepping confidently into the future, he was finally home. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Your support makes a difference. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. What resonates with you? Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second to spread the inspiration.